Please give a warm welcome to
E moina ronga ki rongi te mato te whenua, e whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa, tihei mauri ora. I te tūtahi he mihi tēnei ki te mana whenua o te rohi nei, nā te whātua ki o rākei, tēnā koutou katoa. Ki a koe e te wāhine Māori. Ki tātū mai, nei o ngā tai o te whenua moimoia. E te tākuta Helen Caldicott, no mai, haere mai, whakatau mai ki Aotearoa. Nā kuru te whiwhi ki whakatau ki tuku te reo kāranga ki a koe i te rānei. Ko me tere tirei ahau, te kaiarahi takirua o te rōpū kākāriki o te Aotearoa. He rōpū he whakamana ana i te whakamārietanga he tino pou o tā mātou kawemata. Nā rei, te mihi mahana ki a koe, ki o mahi ki te hāpai ake e tērā matapono kia whakakati ai i ngā pūnau karehi mō ngā nāhurutanga maha. E rere haere ngā mihi ki a koe, Marilyn?
Kia ora.
Ki o mahi rangatira kia pua wai ai ki whakamārietanga i Aotearoa. Tēnā koe. Kai aku nui, kai aku rahi, tēnā koutou katoa. May peace cover the land and goodwill be to all people. First, I want to acknowledge the people, the mana whenua of this land, Ngāti Whātua ki o Rākei. Thank you for allowing us to be here on your land. To you, Helen, Dr. Helen Caldicott, a woman of peace, who has been brought here on the tides of the dreamland. Welcome to Aotearoa. It's my really great honour to extend this call of hospitality to you today. I'm Mitiria, the co-leader of the Green Party, and we are a party that honours non-violence as a central pillar of our charter that holds our whole organisation and kaupapa together. So it is a very warm greeting to you and for your work that uplifts this principle and the many years you have spent opposing nuclear energy for so many decades. So kia ora. And to you, Marilyn, extend a greeting to you for your distinguished work to blossom non-violence in Aotearoa. So thank you. And greetings finally to you all who are gathered here to hear these wonderful words from these two wonderful women. Kia ora koutou katoa.
and I'm the Acting General Manager of the Peace Foundation. It's a real privilege to welcome you all here. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Marilyn Waring, who's kindly agreed to introduce Dr. Helen Caldicott. You'll hear from my accent that I'm a foreigner and you are a resident, and if some of you, like me, wonder who is Dr. Marilyn Waring, well, she's a former National Party MP who crossed the floor in 1984 on the nuclear ships issue. Who better? Who better than Marilyn to introduce Dr. Helen Caldicott. Marilyn.
Kia ora tātou. The background information tells you that Dr. Helen Caldicott qualified in paediatrics in Adelaide and went from there to Harvard Medical School. She was an instructor in paediatrics there, and she became president of the Physicians for Social Responsibility. And that group quickly made its mark by documenting the presence of strontium-90 in the teeth of children, a landmark finding that assisted the limited nuclear test ban treaty. But it was the 3 Mile Island catastrophe that changed Helen's life when an equipment failure resulted in cooling water to the core of that generating station, causing a partial meltdown. That galvanised Helen, and very soon after that she published Nuclear Madness. In 1982, a Canadian film director, Terry Nash, turned up at NYU, I think it might have been. And Helen was giving a lecture, and Terry Nash filmed that lecture, and that became the documentary If You Love This Planet. If You Love This Planet was simultaneously banned by the US Department of Justice as foreign propaganda and won the Academy Award for Best Documentary in the same year. One made it. I think Helen first came with the film, the documentary, to New Zealand in 1983. And from many of the people in this room I know, and I see the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom have spent their entire lives opposing weaponry of any kind. But there was a very distinctive change in New Zealand's consciousness in the late 1970s and early 1980s, as one by one, small local authorities declared themselves nuclear free. They were generally laughed at by the government that I was part of, but I could see people who held National Party offices, who were also mayors, using their casting votes to declare their towns and cities nuclear free. And I always believed that local body politicians, I've changed my mind in Auckland of course, were closer to the people than those in central government. Helen's trips to New Zealand in 1983 and 1984 were possibly the single most significant visit that New Zealand received from anybody to educate and to galvanise people who had not been on the streets, people who had never thought of themselves as protesters for peace. The public addresses were sold out. I remember in Wellington that there had to be microphones set up to listen in buildings nearby. And it's the nature of the content of Helen's lectures, I think, that are so important. First of all, she dignifies all of us with intelligence. There's no shortcuts. She takes us with her on her teaching. In 2015, I asked Helen, how did she manage to continue over decades to effectively deliver bad news and to keep her audiences with her? And she talked about being a doctor and learning to speak, especially to parents of children, in languages that can be understood, to deconstruct the particular specific high-flowing words into something that keeps us awake and also can make us laugh, because sometimes the things she has to say are pretty awful. Helen transformed my life in a way. In 83, or right through, from 75, I felt very lonely. And as the movement started in New Zealand to ban nuclear-powered and nuclear weapons-bearing ships, I began to feel comforted, I began to feel supported, I began to feel that the New Zealand public was truly behind this extraordinary movement. I remember in May 1983, 20,000 women dressed in white, carrying flowers and with armbands, with peace signs, held the largest rally we'd ever had. And perhaps on Saturday, there might be some of the same people able to join that demonstration. We were so close to each other and never met until one evening when I was visiting Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Helen and I were in touch. And I went to her home to have dinner. I'm not sure we got through the first course, and Chernobyl went into meltdown, and the world started to ring Helen. All these years later, you're still on the case. You're so special. We love you in this country. Thank you.
Well, I love all of you too. And you don't know how much you're admired and respected throughout the rest of the world. When you brought in the no nuclear ships, I was in America, and people were so glad that you did that. And Lonnie told me he got literally thousands and thousands of letters from grateful Americans, because you had the courage to stand up to the strongest nation in the world and say no, to stop being enablers to their nuclear addiction, but to be a good friend. And that's what good friends do when their parents are alcoholics or whatever. Don't be an enabler. And I want to dedicate this lecture to Professor Derek North, who was the Professor of Medicine at Auckland University and who literally started IPPNW, along with, who was the guy in Wellington? Ian Pryor. Derek was a wonderful man and so supportive and helped to organise the doctors in this country. And he died on the 14th of August, unfortunately, because I would love to have seen him. But you're all heroes. And so I guess I dedicate this lecture to you too. I've been in Wellington, on the 8th story of a hotel, rocking and rolling during the earthquake and the aftershocks and the winds of 140k an hour. I thought about nature and what nature does and how the earth splits apart and has volcanoes and stuff. And I thought it might be a metaphor for what we could experience in the near term. And that is still nuclear war. I'm very distressed by your Prime Minister, King, who would cause a longing to turn in his grave. To allow a single American ship, nuclear or not, doesn't matter, it's a killer. Those warships kill. And we've got to stop killing each other or we're going to blow up the planet. But killing is good for profits. And that's why Lockheed Martin is here, the biggest weapons manufacturer in the world, and it makes profits by building weapons of mass destruction and probably leading to the end of life on Earth. You should never, ever let Lockheed Martin in here. And I'll go a little bit more fully into Lockheed Martin in a minute. But those ships are coming in. It's a glorification of war, and it's funny how we glorify war. You know, when you go to Europe, there's a killer on a horse in every square. They're all men. And I'm writing a book, I haven't got very far yet, called Why Men Kill and Why Women Let Them. Because unless we get to the etiology, and etiology of a disease is the cause of the disease. For instance, until Jonas Salk developed, well, we found the polio virus with Sabine, and developed the polio vaccine, we didn't know why people were developing infantile paralysis, like poor old FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He went to a scout camp several days before he developed polio, and he got the virus there. So unless we can find the cause of a disease, we can't cure it. That's why we can't cure many cancers. So what is the cause or reason why men kill? Well, you know, there's a lot of work done on testosterone and oxytocin, which is the hormone that women secrete when they have had a baby and when they're breastfeeding. It's a very nurturing hormone. I remember when I was breastfeeding my babies, I felt I could feed the whole world. I could look after the whole world. It's an amazing hormone. And there was an experiment done in a lab in Los Angeles by a woman who was investigating hormones. And she noticed when there was an altercation, the men would go into their rooms and slam the door and sit there and sulk and fume. And the women would come in the next day and clean the benches and make the coffee and help to organise things, and they were really peacekeepers. And also recently there's been work done on rats, but also it probably applies to males as well. I didn't mean that to be nasty, sorry. Actually it's funny, but I didn't mean it. No, we're all mammals, and you know, our biological systems are very similar. And now, any men in the audience, please don't think I'm talking about you. Don't take it personally. This is a generic problem, okay? So the two centres in the male brain, in the midbrain, for violence and sex are very closely related. In fact, the neurons overlap a bit. And you know, when you have an orgasm, you have that lovely, lovely feeling, and it's a dopamine release, like a morphine. Gorgeous, right? As you get older, it's harder to do. It's true, isn't it? Anyway, but also, it's been found that violence induces the dopamine response too. And it's interesting, why do they play porno films to men taking off from aircraft carriers to drop bombs and kill people? Why do men ejaculate when they go into battle? Why do they rape women when they conquer territory, when the women have had nothing to do with it? Why is it so important for men to have sex? I don't get it. Why are they bringing prostitutes in to service the men? Can't they contain themselves? What is this drive? Why do they have to do it? I'm asking a rhetorical question, and I don't know. Does anyone know? What is it? But so I'm investigating this, and it's going to be controversial, and it's very important because what?
I've got an answer.
What?
For 10 years I've been doing violence intervention programs with men.
Yeah.
And the big twist is that men are cultured to suppress their feelings. And until men are encouraged that it's strong to express feelings as opposed to repress them, then the only way that they're able to express feelings
Oh, that's interesting.
sex.
It's very interesting, isn't it? People get very offended when I talk about this, which means I'm really hitting a nerve. Obviously it was important for men to be strong when we were troglodytes and we were breastfeeding our babies in the cave, and the men killed the saber-toothed tigers and the marauding tribes. But now, if we don't stop killing each other, and that's the drive behind Lockheed Martin and the whole goddamn thing, all these ships, we'll destroy life on the planet. And honestly, I don't know how we're still here. I do not know. Because what is happening at the moment is that Hillary Clinton, who has never seen a war she didn't like, and I guess, it's a bit like Thatcher, because you would say, well, she's a woman, but I used to say Maggie Thatcher had an adenoblastoma on her ovary, which secreted testosterone. I think that the magic number of 30%, below 30% of representation, women tend to vote to please the men, vote for missiles, etc. Above 30%, there's such mutual reinforcement that women, whether they're Republican or Democrat, whatever, say, no, we're not voting for missiles today, we're voting for milk for children. And so the magic number is 30%, but it actually should be 52%, because 52% of the population are women. And it's interesting, why do we stand back? And I'm just extrapolating now, but often I'll give a talk and the Americans come down, they're all excited, and the man will say something to me, and I say, that's a good idea, you should run for Congress. And he sticks his chest out and says, yes. And the woman will come up with a similar really good idea, and I'll say, that's great, you should run for Congress. She literally takes 2 steps backwards and says, who, me? I don't know if that's hormonal or what it is, but it's worth investigating. And so often I speak in America, and young women came up and say, you're so brave and courageous. And I say, why? I'm just telling the truth. Well, I suppose, as Marilyn mentioned, we in medicine have to tell the patients the truth. So we're used to telling patients bad news. Now, you've been wonderful all these years, but now you're not. You're allowing these ships to come into your harbour, and they're all warships and they're all killing ships. From New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Cook Islands, Chile. And you've got that frigate coming in from Chile where Pinochet tortured people. What are you letting a torture ship in? China, France, India, Indonesia. Fly the flag. Japan, Samoa, Singapore, Korea, Tonga, and the United States. Countries bringing officers or soldiers only: Brunei, Fiji, Germany, Papua New Guinea, Timor, UK and Vietnam. Now this is all part of the Pacific pivot. It was decided some years ago by Obama et al. That they would bring 60% of their forces from other areas in the world into the Pacific. Because you see, after the Cold War ended, the military-industrial complex had no enemies. There was the peace dividend, and you don't make money from peace if you're building weapons. You've got to make people frightened, and you've got to build weapons, and there has to be an enemy. Well, I'll talk about Russia in a minute, and Putin, but China, although it's the biggest trading partner of America, is also now being developed as the new Cold War enemy. And America has surrounded China with 200 US bases surrounded China with anti-missile forces. China's only got 10 bases in the Pacific. And in toto, America's got 400 bases in the Pacific. Well, God damn them. The Pacific is ours, it's not theirs. Just because they won the Second World War, how dare they think that they can come here and monopolise and dominate the Pacific? Well, in Hawaii, they've got the Pacific Command, which controls 1/3 of the world's population. In other words, it can kill 1/3 of the world's population. And on the mountain in Hawaii is a huge cross demonstrating to the people in the Pacific Command of their responsibility towards God. That's sort of ironic, isn't it? And the Americans think they're the policemen of the world. Well, we don't want to be policed. But what we have to do is stand up to them and reveal their evil. Their evil. Because what they're doing is rotating to the Pacific, and this whole exercise is part of the Pacific pivot by America. And you're going along with it. Why? Where is Key? He reminds me of Harper in Canada. Pathetic. It's pathetic. And he doesn't represent you. He doesn't represent the courage of the New Zealand people and your stand that you took so long ago, and you were so admired. So, Japan, what is happening is they're militarising Japan. There are islands in Japan called the Ryukyu Islands, and they're militarising those islands. And I just want to read to you what that means. They're building bases on them and just destroying nature. The 275 square mile island of Amami Oshima is a place so teeming with biodiversity that has been nominated for UNESCO World Heritage status. 73,000 people live on 30% of the island. The other 7% is comprised of rolling hills that are entirely wild and carpeted with a thick green tangle of endemic original forest. A crab-filled mangrove swamp is set inland. Ringing the island is a coral reef with adorable pufferfish, noted for sculpting its astonishing undersea sand mandalas, and loads of calico-shelled cone snivers. Drinkable water bleeds from cracks in fern-covered cliffs. The island is home to 300 species of birds, butterflies as big as your hand, jade and gold frogs, salamanders, sea and freshwater turtles, the unique Ryukyu ayu fish, endemic orchids and rare ficus trees, The small-eared Amami rabbit, one of the many species found only here, is sometimes called a living fossil because it represents an ancient Asian lineage that has elsewhere disappeared. There have even been a sighting on the coast of the extremely rare North Pacific right whale, a species of which it believes there are only 30 remaining. A firing range in the forest and state-of-the-art missile base will decimate the island and the natural wonders. Can you imagine people doing that? Can you imagine? The most southern island to be militarised is the 11-square-mile island of Yonaguni. It's strategically positioned less than 100 miles from the uninhabited Senkaku Islands, a piece of geography being hotly contested with China. When this person visited that island before the activists began gathering, he saw herds of wild endemic ponies roaming freely on fenceless pastures and even on the streets. But now their main watering hole is being replaced by bulldozers, churning out a radar surveillance station, scheduled for completion in 2017. Entomologists are alarmed that the radar will kill many of the island's celebrated but fragile butterfly species. This is our Pacific, and Pacific means peace. And yet the Americans come in and we don't even know what they're doing till we read this stuff and find out what they're up to. They're building, they've got 32 bases on Okinawa, and they're building a new base in Okinawa. And 70% of the area of Okinawa is controlled by the Americans, and they rape the women, they fly planes in all the time, they have prostitutes, the whole thing. The Philippines, well, it's interesting with Duarte now, he's a pretty awful man. He's killed nearly 3,000 people because they're drug addicts or they take drugs or whatever. But he said he wants to keep the Americans up, which is a good thing. Indonesia, I'm not sure what's happening with Indonesia. Australia, we've got 34 US bases. We are allowing Marines to come into Darwin, and they're rotating through Darwin and other countries. Marines are they're really well-trained killers. Julia Gillard, bless her heart, allowed the Marines to come into our country. We've got Pine Gap, which orchestrates the drone killing all over the world, spies on the whole world in our external and internal communications, would orchestrate a nuclear war, and they pay us one peppercorn a year. The reason for the rent, the reason that Gough Whitlam was removed from government by Sir John Kerr, who Whitlam called Kerr's Kerr, is because Whitlam was going to announce the CIA operatives at Pine Gap the next day in Parliament. So they removed him. How dare they remove our best Prime Minister we ever had? New Zealand, you've got a listening base here, haven't you? It's part of the Five Eyes system. What? Yeah. Hawaii, I've talked about. South Korea, there's a lovely island called Jeju Island in South Korea, which was teeming with wildlife, and they've dug it all up, and they're going to send in all sorts of aircraft carriers and ships and frigates and the like. NATO is moving into the Pacific. Okay, so NATO was set up during the Cold War to prevent Russia from invading Europe. When the Cold War ended, NATO ceased to have any function. The Bush administration, George I, met with Gorbachev, who I've met too, Gorbachev. He's a wonderful man. And they promised that the newly liberated countries like Lithuania and Poland, I'm partly Polish, my name is actually Helen Caldicott. I've just found out I'm 30% Jewish, so I'm really pleased about that too. Anyway, all these countries, they promised they wouldn't encourage them to join NATO, but that wasn't good for Lockheed Martin and other corporations. They need to sell their weapons. So there's a man called Norman Augustine, who is the chairman of Lockheed Martin, who set it upon himself to go to all these little countries and say, do you want to be a democracy? Do you want to join NATO? But to join NATO, they had to militarise. to the teeth. These little tiny countries with no money, they all agreed. He orchestrated a referendum in Hungary, and the Hungarians voted to join NATO. So they enlarged NATO, which is America, it's totally America, up to the border of Russia. And at the moment they're conducting huge military exercises right on the border of Russia with tanks, 40,000 troops, you name it, provoking Russia. Russia is very upset. Can you imagine what America would do if Russia came into Canada, right on the border of America, and said, well, we now work with Canada and we're conducting huge military exercises here. They'd blow up the world. They nearly did when Russia dared to put a few missiles in Cuba, do you remember? I knew Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defence. He was in the Oval Office with Jack Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He said to me, Helen, you don't know how close we came to within 3 minutes. Now, those situations occur not infrequently every year, getting really close to nuclear war. So the Russians don't like what the Americans are doing, so they're practicing nuclear war exercises right up on the border. They're flying their planes over ships, American ships, in the oceans. They've elevated their alert to a higher alert with their nuclear weapons, and America has too, and it's really good for Lockheed Martin. And Lockheed Martin is rejoicing that NATO is so strong. They're militarised. They made $17 million by orchestrating NATO and buying weapons. And it's really good for them because you have to create an enemy and fear. Hillary never saw a war she didn't like. She destroyed Gaddafi. And in Libya, the two countries way back that had the highest rate of literacy and the lowest rate of infant mortality were Libya and Iraq. She was in favour of going to Iraq, and they've totally destroyed that country and created ISIS, which has been funded by Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Qatar and America. And they're encouraging ISIS to invade Syria because in Syria, Russia has a huge naval base in the Mediterranean, a big naval base. So they want to get rid of Assad, who was democratically elected, and take over Syria. I mean, they have no moral conscience, and they will overthrow any government they want, including my government in Australia. I'm very annoyed with the Americans. And the problem is the average person who is a decent person in America doesn't know what the government's doing in its name. Over 60 cents of every federal discretionary tax dollar paid by Americans goes to the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex. So the Pentagon and the dark operative secret organisations in the Pentagon, it costs the American dollars $1 trillion a year. Now they're going to spend $1 trillion in the next 30 years replacing every single hydrogen bomb, submarine, aircraft carrier, missile and plane, because it's good for the military-industrial complex. Do you see how evil this is? And by you participating with this naval exercise is the beginning. This warship that's coming in is the Trojan horse. Remember the Trojans took their wooden horse and got in and destroyed, was it Greece? Troy. So you've got to know the background of what these people are up to and how you're participating by letting them do this. And I suppose key thinks, oh, that's great to, waltz on the world stage with the Americans. And I've got a similar Prime Minister who's just as hopeless. So what is happening also, as well as arming these NATO nations and pushing them to the brink of the Russian border, America orchestrated a coup in the Ukraine. Now, the Ukraine was run by a man called Yanukovych, who was close to Putin. The EU said to Yanukovych, we want the Ukraine to join the EU. But to join the EU, you have to tighten your belts like Greece had to, and Spain, and lose your medical benefits and the like. And Yanukovych didn't want to do that. So he said to Putin, what will I do? And Putin said, wait for 6 months and they'll give you some money and we'll see what we do. Meanwhile, Victoria Nuland in the State Department, a neocon, really close to Hillary, and she would have been in the new administration, went to the Ukraine, and there was a big demonstration and a lot of people died in Maiden Square, and there was a person shooting people, and that was all. She was handing out what they call cookies to the people. They orchestrated that coup, and they put in a man called Poroshenko, who is a Nazi. And a lot of people working with Poroshenko are Nazis, and they're being funded and armed by the Americans. And many people in the eastern part of the Ukraine speak Russian, and they want to be part of Russia. And so they didn't like what was going on, so they started fighting the people who support Poroshenko, and so a war started. Russia supported those people. She didn't invade, but she did support them. I don't know, is it 370 that got shot down, the Malaysian aircraft? I don't know who shot that plane down, but I think it may have been some of the people in the eastern side of the Ukraine who made a mistake, because there were recordings saying, oh, do you know what we've just done? Oh my God, sort of thing. But now, so in America, the story is that Russia has invaded the Ukraine. Oh, and then there was the Crimea, which then after the Ukraine sort of broke away from Russia, the Crimea has always been Russian. It was been Russian since Catherine the Great. And they voted in the Crimea, and 96% said they wanted to stay with Russia. Well, America says Russia invaded the Crimea, and Russia's being aggressive. Well, she's not. It's America that's being aggressive, but the story that's put out all the time is Russia's aggressive, and Hillary even called Putin Hitler recently. Hillary said she would drop a hydrogen bomb on Iran years ago. And when Trump was elected, there was a celebration in the Duma in Russia, because Putin kind of likes, Trump kind of likes Putin, because Putin likes Trump, you see, and Trump's got so egocentric and so pathetic, he likes people who like him. Well, the good thing is Trump has just today rung Putin, and they've had a good talk, and they've agreed it's a good idea to get on well together and make relationships. Well, that's a good idea when you think about it, because it's Putin that's got 10 hydrogen bombs targeted on New York City. One for every airport, one for every bridge, one for every tunnel, one for every university, and the Russian bombs are big. And in fact, Russia's got every town and city targeted in New Zealand, an industrial facility, a military facility, in Australia, in Canada, in America, in Europe, and England, and Japan. Well, you don't threaten paranoid patients. And Putin was getting pretty paranoid, being pushed around by the Americans. And I know from experience as a doctor, if a patient's paranoid, you handle them with kid gloves, because they're likely to turn on you and do something really nasty. I had a patient I was called to once. Well, he became schizophrenic over the weekend. He went to a business conference and came back, and he totally lost the plot, and his wife rang me, and I had to go, and I was chasing him around the house with a syringe of chlorpromazine, like Actal, trying to shove it into his bottom, and he was running around after me, shoving his hand up my skirt and saying, bitch, bitch, and it was pretty scary. So you don't know what these people are going to do, and so it's medically contraindicated to threaten Putin, because he may retaliate and blow up the world. So Gorbachev is saying, and there's another guy called Bill Perry, who was the former Secretary of Defence, and General Cartwright and others who really know what's going on. We're closer to nuclear war now than we were at the height of the Cold War. Why? Because America is setting Russia up to be the enemy and provoking and prodding them just so she can sell more weapons. And they were even calling the State Department for a regime change in Russia. Can you imagine to remove Putin? The Second World War was won on the Russian front. They lost 27 million people. The siege of Leningrad. I went to Leningrad. They starved for 3 years. I went to a cemetery. Huge plots containing hundreds and hundreds of people that died of starvation. And the peasants bring bread and put bread on the graves. And you walk down this huge avenue, and at the end is Mother Russia holding a wreath. And the sounds of Beethoven's double violin concerto are heard in the background. They suffered so much. And they've got such an ancient, wonderful culture. They're proud people. How dare America talk about regime change in Russia, which would mean actually the end of the world. So by you participating and allowing this American ship in, and there'll be more, you've got to stop it. I mean, you've got to rise up again and have people in the streets and show the world what a proud nation that's well informed does because of this Pacific pivot, because you are part of the Pacific pivot. America taking over the Pacific, putting bases, anti-missile bases everywhere, radars, you name it, so that she can provoke China. And China spends hardly any money on the military, but she's being provoked to spend more now. So let's go back to basics. America's got over 1,000 hydrogen bombs on missiles, and they're underground in these missile silos. Each missile has about 3 hydrogen bombs. That's called MIRVing, multiple independent re-entry vehicles. So when the missile is launched, it goes up into space, and it's called a bus. And the bus lets off its passengers, which are the hydrogen bombs, all targeted accurately to land on whatever city they want to destroy. So, and the men in the missile silos, they're officers aged 18 to 21, each armed with a pistol, one to shoot the other if one shows signs of deviant behaviour. What if the deviant one shoots the other one? The locks are 12 feet apart, so one person can't turn both locks, but they work out if they tie a string to one key, one man can turn both locks. It's yes, sir, no, sir, press the button, sir. Recently, about 80 of these men have been discharged because they've been found cheating, they're taking drugs down in the missiles, they're going to sleep on duty. The man who's in charge of the three air wings, they're called air wings, in North Dakota, South Dakota, and I think Colorado. He was the officer in charge of all of this. He went to Moscow and he had too much to drink. He was cavorting with naughty ladies and he wanted to sing karaoke and he disgraced himself. So he was removed. And then there's another one who was in charge too, and he was cheating and gambling. He was removed too, because we're talking about fallible human beings in charge of the mechanism to destroy evolution. I went whale watching the other day in Jervis Bay, and the baby whales with white tummies were literally leaping out of the water with joy. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about my purple double iris, my roses and my sunflowers, and I look out on the garden and I know, not just us, but all of this will go. Maybe the only life in the universe. I once asked Carl Sagan, the great astronomer, if he thought there was any other life. And he paused for a long time and then he said, no. And I said, why? And he said, if any species had evolved to where we are, they would have destroyed themselves. So here are these 1,000 weapons, not just in the missile silos, but in Trident submarines. There are 14 Trident submarines. I think 10 have nuclear weapons on them. Each one has 24 missiles. Each missile carries 8 hydrogen bombs. And they are about 3 minutes from Moscow if they launch. And the commander, in fact, if he gets his 2IC to go along with him, could launch his Trident missile. I don't know how we're still here. They are flying huge B-52s over Russia at the moment with nuclear weapons in them. And say that on 9/11 we got to the second highest state of nuclear alert. It went from DEFCON 5, 4, 3, 2, and the next one was press the button. Why? Because no one knew what was happening. No one knew who'd flown into the Trade Towers. George Bush was reading My Pet Goat to a kindergarten class. Cheney was in the basement of the White House, and they were ready to have a nuclear war. Those sort of international situations could provoke a nuclear war. If India and Pakistan, and they're very volatile on the border, and each have 200 hydrogen bombs, if they started launching, that could start a global holocaust. Anything could start. A rising moon once set off the satellites, because the satellites, they can pick up the attack coming because they pick up the reflection of the sun or the moon on the hydrogen bombs. That's how we know that we're under attack. And if we did have a nuclear war, it takes about an hour to complete. The missiles and the bombs take half an hour to go from launch to land, and vice versa. America's got a policy to fight and win a nuclear war. Win a nuclear war. And that means you win a nuclear war, this is male thinking, I have to say, that they target 2 hydrogen bombs on each missile silo, landing within seconds, because if you muck up the time, there's so much gravel and dust, the second bomb coming in will be destroyed. So you've got to actually target it very carefully. And that's called counterforce. You destroy their missiles so they can't launch. There's another policy called counter-value, where you target cities and people, and that sort of collateral damage, but you kill all the people. And the third one is both counterforce and counter-value. So always walking just behind the president is a man with a suitcase, and that's the football. And it's got all the codes for the nuclear war in it. And in the pocket of the president is the biscuit. And the biscuit gives him the exact codes to put into the football to start a nuclear war. When Reagan was shot, they lost the football for 2 days. Jimmy Carter sent his suit to the dry cleaner with the biscuit in it. Human fallibility. How we're still here, God only knows. Yeah, it takes an hour to complete. And as the bombs land, and I suppose I'll drop the bomb right here on this place in Auckland, the Russian bombs are big, and you're all targeted. So in comes a 20 megaton bomb, and that's 20 million tonnes of TNT. Hiroshima was 13,000 tonnes of TNT equivalent. It will come in at 20 times the speed of sound, so you won't hear it. Explode with, I think, 20 times the heat inside the centre of the sun. Dig a hole 3/4 of a mile wide and 800 feet deep, turning us and everything to radioactive fallout shot up in the mushroom cloud. 5 miles from the epicentre, everyone is vaporised. A little boy in Hiroshima was reaching up to catch a red dragonfly in his hand against the blue sky. And there was a blinding flash, and he disappeared and left his shadow on the pavement, which is now in the Hiroshima Museum, a shadow of a human being, a little boy. If people look at the flash miles away, their eyes will melt and run down their cheeks, which is what happened to people in Hiroshima. And that was a very small bomb. Out to 20 miles, everyone lethally burnt. People sucked out of buildings with winds of 500 miles an hour, turning them into missiles travelling at 100 miles an hour. Pieces of glass decapitating people travelling at 100 miles an hour. Then the whole area is engulfed in the firestorm of 3,000 square miles. And the fires coalesce across the country, right across America, north to south, east to west, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. And as everything burns, the radioactive black cloud, and the cities are full of toxic chemicals, oil refineries, plastic, wood. And as they burn, all this black smoke rises into the stratosphere because it's so hot and the drafts are so strong, and it covers the earth with a cloud so thick it blocks out the sun for 10 years. And without any sun, we'll have a nuclear winter and a short ice age, and everything and everyone will die. Maybe the algae might survive or the cockroaches, but not us. And I don't know, because I know that so often we have very, very close calls. I don't know how we're still here. And if people ask me, I mean, we've got global warming to cope with too, so is it, do we end with a bang or a whimper? The thing is, we can fix it. Reagan, who I met with in the Oval Office for, no, not the Oval Office, but in the White House for an hour and a quarter and tried to change his mind. He almost agreed with Gorbachev to abolish nuclear weapons. Two mere mortals over a weekend almost agreed to abolish nuclear weapons. There are 15,300 hydrogen bombs in the world. Russia and America own 94%. People say, well, what about Iran? Iran has no nuclear weapons. Or what about North Korea? North Korea might have two. She might blow up New York City. I don't care about that. What about the whole world and the creation? So there's a very big movement now in the UN, and you're part of it, New Zealand, Australia won't join, to abolish nuclear weapons. It's called ICAN, and 127 nations have agreed to pass a law next year to make nuclear weapons illegal, like chemical weapons, like landmines. And they should be. They're the most revolting things that could ever exist. I think it's part of the testosterone syndrome, you know. The language that the officers use, like missile erector, soft laydown, deep penetration, hard line and soft line, will have nuclear war like one big orgasmic wump. It's all sort of sexual in a way, and that's how they see it. So we can actually, but America won't sign, and the truth is, if America won't stop building nuclear weapons and having its arsenal, which they say is defence, it's nothing to do with defence, it's annihilation. And it's not the Department of Defence, it's the Department of Killing. Let's use the appropriate English language. It's no defence, Department of Killing. We've got to stop killing. But we can abolish nuclear weapons easily. Just undo the goddamn things. I don't know what we do with the plutonium that lasts for 500,000 years and 1/1,000th of a gram is carcinogenic, and each bomb contains 5 kilograms of plutonium, let alone everything else. And we can fix global warming by filling this country up with windmills and solar panels and hydropower, and Australia with windmills. But why don't we do it? Because the fossil fuel companies own the politicians, who are all corporate prostitutes. And Lockheed Martin owns the Congress, and they make planes like the F-35 strike bomber, which they're going to build 2,400, and the whole thing is costing $1 trillion, the enterprise, and it doesn't work. They have helmets for the pilots, which are so awful they produce whiplash injury. They can't find the targets on the ground. The radio doesn't work. But it's such a boondoggle for Lockheed Martin. And I've got a huge amount of information here about Lockheed Martin. You must not have that damn conference here. How dare you host a conference with the biggest weapons maker in the world, the biggest killer? It's a killer. Why? You've got to close it down. How do you close it down? Well, I'll give you an example. Here's something funny but sort of silly. I was speaking in the Herbst Lecture Theatre next to Gorbachev years ago when we were worried about Y2K and the rollover. Remember? Corporations spent billions of dollars trying to fix their computers because they were programmed for the year 2000, but not after that. We were worried there might be a nuclear war, meltdowns. I went to the White House. They put me on a conference with the Pentagon who said everything's okay. The Pentagon, in fact, retrospectively lost their computers for 8 months during the rollover. And no one was interested. The media was so disinterested. So I was speaking, and Patch Adams, you know, the clown doctor, he went to the microphone. He said, I've been telling Helen since August we should take our clothes off and walk across America. And I thought, Jesus, Patch. So I went to the mic, and there were about as many people, and I said, who'll take their clothes off? Every hand went up. And one woman yelled, I'll bring the media. So we go out to this with red velvet foyer, and Patch gets his gear off, And so I did. I had a scarf which covered the naughty bits and I kept my pearls on. Everyone else got their clothes off, fat, skinny, thin, but the human body is beautiful. It's beautiful, and I know that as a doctor. And I thought, what are we going to do? So we led them out onto Van Ness Avenue. It was quite cold and it was at night. And we started walking down and someone started chanting, nudes, not nukes. Nudes, not nukes. Which is perfect, because the human body is so vulnerable to radiation. And guys were driving along and suddenly they pulled their car up and looked out and started cutting us. And they didn't even know why we were doing it or what we were doing. And we got to the corner, I thought, I don't want to go in a black Mariah to an American jail naked, stark naked. So we came back, and we were all standing in the foyer, no one wanted to get dressed. Everyone was so proud, because it was an innocent, really pure thing that we'd done. I'm standing stark naked talking to the ABC on my cell phone. And guess what? We got into the New York Times the next day because they like to see naughty bits. I mean, that's just an idea. I told people in America they should surround the Pentagon and then all take your clothes off and say nudes, not nukes. Well, it's very powerful, putting your body on the line. But there are many ideas like that. I thought we could have babies against the Pentagon, and when people are debating in the Senate chamber nuclear weapons, you release hundreds of naked toddlers into the Senate chamber and they can clean up the mess. So you can have fun as well. I mean, you've all got the picture, haven't you? Life is in the balance, and I don't know how long we'll be here. And the thing is, I just want to stress one thing, life is precious. I mean, to think that your sperm, out of the millions that were ejaculated that night by your father, each sperm different, reached your egg. How precious is that? And what responsibility does that give us? And what has our responsibility towards our children? Why make sure they clean their teeth or are immunised if we don't make sure they have a future? And they know they don't. They know they don't at the moment. And we can fix global warming and nuclear weapons if we've got the guts. And New Zealand has the guts. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.